Hi there, Michael here. I recently stumbled across some fascinating Dolby Atmos takes on Reddit, and by fascinating I mean the kind that make you question humanity's collective audio knowledge. And since I've apparently never made a response to Redditor's video before, I figured why not dive into this rabbit hole. Now I know what you're expecting, a sterile white room, a bucket full of questions, and me dramatically pulling them out like I'm hosting some sort of audio lottery. Or maybe the classic, my team carefully curated those questions, and this is totally the first time I'm seeing them routine. Well, here's the thing. My room is aggressively not white. My buckets are currently occupied by actual useful things, and my team is just me, a coffee mug, and sometimes crippling self doubt. So I've already read every comment I'm going to talk about, which kind of ruins the whole surprise element. But hey, if it helps preserve the magic, I can try to be surprised by these comments. Or maybe not. Well, alright then, let's see how badly this goes. Dolby Atmos is just another marketing gimmick that no one should care about in consumer-grade electronics. Well, that is a common complaint from people who are frustrated by the fact that some companies are trying to push Dolby Atmos on them, and whether or not Dolby Atmos is going to stay around is certainly up for debate, and we will quite frankly see if that's going to happen. But the underlying technology or the idea of immersive audio is going to stay, and that is simply because we are seeing more and more applications where immersive media are critical, like for example for augmented reality or virtual reality applications. And while those things have been around for a long time as well, we are now starting to see the first commercially accepted technologies that utilize immersive media. And if you're working with immersive media, you also need immersive audio. So in essence, immersive audio is going to stay. Is it going to be Atmos? I honestly don't know. It could be, maybe it's something else. Eclipse audio looks interesting. But if you are frustrated by Dolby Atmos, I completely understand that. Kind of if you prefer to use stereo, then just use stereo. There's nothing wrong with that. But be aware that eventually applications will use more and more immersive audio. So it does make sense to at least care about Dolby Atmos. Dolby Atmos is stupid on anything but a speaker system. It's like soundbars giving stereo sound with a 3-foot long soundbar. When to get stereo, you need 6 feet between channels. Well, like many of these comments, there's a half truth to that. It is certainly true that in order to get the best impression, you need a proper speaker system, and ideally one that you would have in a music studio, for example, so a 9.1.6 speaker system, which quite frankly is often not possible, especially in a living room setup. But it would be ideal, obviously. Now, Dolby Atmos can be heard in other ways as well, though, and there's nothing wrong with having a system that kind of uses a different approach, like, for example, speakers that are bouncing audio from the walls and from the ceiling of your room. So that's certainly something that works surprisingly well. Once again, not ideal, but to say that the only way to experience Dolby Atmos correctly is with a proper speaker setup is just wrong. You can, for example, listen to Atmos perfectly fine with headphones and a binaural rendering. And if you're using Apple AirPods or Beats headphones, for example, you can even use head tracking and get a reasonably good three-dimensional impression with your headphones. Surround sound in general is garbage. Normal 2-channel stereo is sufficient. Well, it really depends a lot on what you're aiming for. If all you want to do is listen to stereo recordings, then yes, obviously, stereo is perfectly fine, and anything above that is overkill. But if you want to use or if you want to consume immersive media, then stereo is just not enough. You need a little bit more in order to create that level of immersion. And quite frankly, if all you ever want to do is listen to stereo, then by all means, just use stereo. Nobody forces you to go immersive. Nobody forces you to use Dolby Atmos, except Apple maybe, but kind of even that you can simply turn off. I think Dolby Atmos is a fraud. Well, that goes a little bit too far, quite frankly. It's certainly something that a couple of companies are trying to push out, but once again, I think it has relevant applications, and people eventually will use some sort of immersive audio technology. Is it going to be Atmos? I don't know. Is spatial audio Dolby Atmos the same as 8D music that is on YouTube? Now, believe it or not, I actually had to look that up, what 8D music is. I've never heard of that. And as it turns out, it is just binaural audio. And it is apparently a trick that people are using to mix in a binaural recording to a regular stereo recording. And the way to do that is they kind of change the azimuth of your binaural kind of rendering. So the sound sort of moves around your head. And with that, what you essentially get is you get the impression that things are kind of moving at the back of your head. Now, people call this a mixing trick or an auditory illusion, but that's not really the case. It's just regular binaural audio and used creatively, and that's perfectly fine. And to answer the question, no, it's not the same thing, not even close. Those are completely different things. And 8D music is a little bit of a misnomer because it seems to indicate that there are 8 dimensions, which is not the case. It's still only stereo, but it's completely different to what Dolby Atmos is. Dolby Atmos is an audio format. 8D music seems to be some sort of mixing trick. Can you play 8D music using 8 surround sound speakers in a circle around the room? Now, this is where the 8 in 8D becomes a bit of a problem because people seem to misunderstand what that actually means. And the answer to that is no, because 8D, once again, is just a mixing trick where you're mixing binaural audio into a stereo signal. And that just means that you're listening to something binaurally. And binaurally means that you have to listen on headphones or something equivalent to headphones. And that's the only way to really consume that type of audio. So no, kind of putting 8 speakers in your room does not help you a bit. I'm sorry if this is a dumb question, and if you start a question like that, then it probably is. But I recently came across 8D sound on YouTube. Does this mean that you could take a 5.1 audio track from a DVD and use this technology to listen to surround sound using normal stereo headphones? Now, this question is actually not so stupid as you might think, because 8D in essence is once again a mixing trick where you're mixing binaural audio into a stereo signal, and that means that you are listening to something in a binaural way. And yes, you can obviously convert 5.1 into binaural and then listen to it on headphones in such a way that you experience things in an immersive way. So in some sense, yes, you can do that, but it's probably not the way this commenter thought it would be. So it's not this magic trick. It's just kind of it's just binaural rendering. That's all it is, and you just need to use a binaural renderer, and that will work fine. So I've been hearing a lot of good things about spatial and lossless audio, and sorry if this is a dumb question, but does it make it sound better in a car also, or just on headphones? Now, anybody with a Dolby Atmos setup in a car will tell you that yes, spatial audio also makes music sound better in a car. And actually, cars are one of those applications that are actually quite natural to spatial audio, because a car is a very well defined environment. And you can simply put the speakers in predefined positions, and you don't have to worry about kind of running cables in your living room and things like that. Everything is kind of very well constructed within the car, and all the cables are running correctly, and kind of everything is kind of set up in a fixed way. So yes, actually cars are a very good example of where spatial audio makes a lot of sense. Now, do you need it? Probably not, but kind of if you have a high-end car, why not have a high-end audio system in your car? And spatial audio is certainly one way to go. Why do they call it Dolby Atmos? Well, I'm not quite sure, because I think I've tried it at most once or twice before turning it off. Has anyone tried putting an ambisonic mic in a parabolic reflector? I know how both of them work, so I know it might be a ridiculous idea, but has anyone tried it? I just wonder what it would sound like. Now, I have not tried that myself, so I'm not quite sure how that would sound, but kind of my feeling is if you put an ambisonics mic into the parabolic reflector, what all you're going to get is a huge mess of sound. Probably not going to be useful in any meaningful way. Can't we just go back to stereo? I honestly think we never left. And if you think we actually are not using stereo anymore, you are spectacularly mistaken. Kind of most things are still stereo. And if you don't like anything immersive, just switch it off and use stereo. Nobody is preventing you from using stereo. I make headphones. People kept asking me for surround sound headphones. I think I nailed it. Kind of one of the things I think that people underestimate is the importance of having fixed speaker locations with surround sound. If your speaker's actually moving with your head, you're not going to have a lot of benefit. In this particular case, you would actually be much, much better off with a binaural headphone or binaural rendering. So while this is a fascinating idea, it's not going to work at all. You essentially are not going to get the effect that you wanted. And quite frankly, I think a couple of weeks ago, or maybe even a couple of months ago, I reviewed an in-ear monitor that actually had multiple speakers that kind of did sort of that by positioning the individual drivers inside the in-ear monitors in such a way that they gave the impression of a 5.1 system. I think it was a 7.1 system. So yeah, people have tried that. Does it make sense? No. My friend got a new surround sound system and he didn't know how to mount the middle speaker, so this is how he did it. Well, that's a funny thing to say, but quite honestly, mounting the center speaker is always a bit of a challenge because the center speaker is supposed to be right in front of you. And if you're working in anything, kind of music production, or even if you're listening to audio by watching a movie, then you know that right in front of you should be the screen. So the center speaker tends to conflict with the position of what you're watching. And that always is an issue. And quite frankly, I've seen many music studios where the center speaker is positioned in such a way that makes absolutely no sense. So, yeah, the center speaker is a bit of an issue. It might be one of the reasons why a lot of producers actually don't use the center channel at all, because it's just so annoying to set up. I have 16 subwoofers in my dedicated room. Yikes. Now, there's a lot to be said for having a system with a lot of speakers. Kind of the more speakers you have, usually the better, but that doesn't mean any speaker. And 16 subwoofers doesn't make a lot of sense. Quite frankly, if you're using 16 subwoofers, you're not really creating a listening environment. What you're really creating is an earthquake simulator. Maybe that's what you're going for. I have no idea. But 16 subwoofers is just overkill. The low frequencies, the human ears cannot really correctly identify where they come from anyway, so 1 or 2 subwoofers is perfectly fine. 16, oh my god, don't do that. Well, that's everything for today. If you have any additional questions or comments, drop them in the comments or join our free Discord server. The invite link is in the description below. And don't forget to subscribe to stay updated on all things Dolby Atmos and immersive audio. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you all in the next video.